The mop bucket wheels squeaked as they rolled across the polished marble floor. It was the same sound every evening, 5 days a week for the past 23 years. Nobody paid attention to it anymore. The students walking past didn't even glance up from their sheet music. To them, the woman pushing that bucket was just part of the building, like the walls or the fancy chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Her name was Dorothy, and she had cleaned every corner of the Riverside Conservatory of Music since she was 20 years old. Now at 43, she knew this place better than anyone. She knew which floorboards creaked in the practice rooms. She knew exactly how the afternoon sunlight would stream through the tall windows in the concert hall. She knew the smell of rosin from the string players and the particular echo your footsteps made in the empty corridors late at night. What nobody knew was that Dorothy had a secret. Every evening, after the last student left and the faculty locked their offices, after the security guard made his rounds and settled into his booth by the front entrance, Dorothy would slip into the main concert hall. She would walk past the rows of velvet seats, climb the steps to the stage, and sit down at the beautiful black grand piano that dominated the space. And then she would play. It started by accident, really. 20 years ago, she had been dusting the piano keys when her finger pressed down on middle C. The sound that came out was so pure, so beautiful, that she pressed another key. Then another. Within a week, she was staying an extra hour after her shift, teaching herself simple melodies by ear. She found an old beginner's piano book in the donation bin outside the administrative office. Someone had thrown it away, probably a student who had moved on to more advanced pieces. Dorothy took it home, studied the notes and symbols by lamplight in her small apartment, and slowly began to understand the language of music. There were no lessons, no teacher to correct her posture or explain the proper technique. Just Dorothy, the piano, and a hunger to learn that kept her coming back night after night. Her fingers grew stronger. The melodies grew more complex. By the end of the first year, she could play simple songs all the way through. By the end of 5 years, she was working on pieces by composers whose names she had only heard whispered in the hallways. The students at Riverside Conservatory came from wealthy families. Their parents paid enormous tuition fees. They had private instructors who charged hundreds of dollars per hour. Some of them had been playing since they were 4 years old, groomed from childhood to become the next generation of concert pianists and symphony musicians. Dorothy emptied their trash cans. She mopped up their spilled coffee. She cleaned the bathrooms they used and polished the instruments they played. During the day, she was invisible to them, but at night, alone on that stage, she felt more alive than she ever did in the sunlight. She never told anyone about her secret practice sessions. What would be the point? Who would care that a cleaning woman could play a little piano? Besides, there was something precious about keeping it to herself. In those quiet evening hours, the music belonged only to her. But then something happened that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when Dorothy saw the poster hanging in the main hallway. The conservatory was hosting its annual community recital, open to anyone in the city who wanted to perform. It was meant to be an outreach program, a way for the fancy music school to connect with regular people. The poster showed a gleaming piano and fancy script that read, "Share your gift. All skill levels welcome." Dorothy stopped her cleaning cart right there in the middle of the hallway. She read the poster 3 times. Her heart was beating faster than it should. All skill levels welcome. Anyone in the community, she could sign up. Technically, she was part of the community. She worked here, didn't she? The poster didn't say you had to be a student or a professional. It said anyone. For the rest of that day, Dorothy couldn't think about anything else. She scrubbed toilets while imagining herself on stage. She emptied trash while hearing music in her head. By the time her shift ended, she had almost convinced herself it was a ridiculous idea, but her feet carried her to the administrative office anyway. The young woman behind the desk was typing on her computer, her fingernails clicking against the keys. She had perfect makeup and hair that looked like it had been professionally styled. She didn't look up when Dorothy approached. "Excuse me," Dorothy said quietly. "I'd like to sign up for the community recital." The young woman glanced up, her eyes taking in Dorothy's cleaning uniform and worn shoes. There was a flicker of surprise on her face, quickly hidden behind a professional smile. "Oh, sure. Let me get you a registration form." She handed Dorothy a clipboard with a single sheet of paper attached. Dorothy's hands were shaking slightly as she filled it out. Name, age, Piece to be performed. She had chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful pieces she had learned during her secret practice sessions. When she handed the clipboard back, the young woman looked at what Dorothy had written. Her eyebrows raised just a little. Chopin, that's quite advanced. I've been practicing, Dorothy said simply. Have you performed before? In recitals or competitions? No. Do you study with anyone? One of our faculty members, perhaps? No, I teach myself. The young woman's expression shifted into something Dorothy couldn't quite read. Doubt maybe, or pity, but she took the form and added it to a folder on her desk. Okay then. The recital is in 3 weeks on November 18th. You'll need to arrive by 6:30 for the performer check-in. Dress code is formal concert attire. Dorothy nodded and thanked her, then pushed her cleaning cart back down the hallway. Behind her, she could hear the young woman on the phone, her voice low but carrying. You won't believe who just signed up for the community recital. Over the next 3 weeks, Dorothy practiced harder than ever. She stayed 2 hours late every night, working through the Chopin piece measure by measure. Her fingers flew over the keys in the empty concert hall. She played the difficult passages over and over until they were smooth. She worked on the dynamics, making some parts whisper soft and others swell with emotion. She knew this piece by heart now. Every note, every pause, every subtle shift in tempo. This was her chance to share what she had kept hidden for 20 years. This was her chance to be seen. But as the recital date grew closer, Dorothy began to hear the whispers. The students talked about her in the hallways, not realizing she could hear them over the sound of her vacuum cleaner. The janitor signed up to perform. Can you imagine? Someone said she's playing Chopin. There's no way. This is going to be so awkward. Dorothy kept her head down and kept cleaning, and every night she kept playing. The evening of November 18th arrived with cold rain tapping against the windows. Dorothy finished her regular shift at 5 o'clock, then went home to change. She didn't own formal concert attire. She had one nice dress, navy blue with simple buttons that she wore to church on Sundays. It would have to be enough. When she returned to the conservatory at 6:15, the building looked different than it did during her night shifts. The lights were all blazing. Well-dressed people were streaming through the entrance. She could hear laughter and conversation echoing through the halls. Dorothy took a deep breath and walked through the backstage entrance, where the performers were gathering. That's when she realized just how much she didn't belong here. Not yet, anyway. The backstage area smelled like expensive perfume and nervous energy. Dorothy stood near the wall, clutching her small handbag, trying to make herself as small as possible. Around her, the other performers moved with the easy confidence of people who belonged in this world. A young man tuned his violin, the notes sharp and precise. 2 teenage girls in matching black dresses compared their sheet music, whispering about finger positions and tempo markings. A boy who couldn't have been more than 12 sat perfectly still in a corner, his cello between his knees, his eyes closed in concentration. They all looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. The men wore tuxedos with bow ties. The women had on elegant gowns that probably cost more than Dorothy made in 3 months. Their instruments gleamed under the backstage lights. Their shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Dorothy looked down at her navy dress. She had ironed it carefully that afternoon, making sure every wrinkle was gone. She had polished her simple black flats until they looked as good as they could. But standing here among these people, she felt like a pigeon that had accidentally flown into a room full of peacocks. Excuse me, are you performing tonight? Dorothy looked up to find a woman with a clipboard staring at her. She wore glasses on a chain around her neck and had the brisk, efficient manner of someone who managed important events. Yes, Dorothy said. I signed up. Dorothy Chen. The woman ran her finger down her list, then stopped, her eyebrows pulled together slightly. Oh, yes. Here you are. She looked Dorothy up and down, not even trying to hide her confusion. And you're playing Chopin's Nocturne? That's right. Have you performed here before? I don't recognize you. I work here, Dorothy said. I clean the building. The words hung in the air between them. The woman's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been concern. I see. Well, you're scheduled to perform last. Number 12. She made a mark on her clipboard. You'll wait here until you hear your name called. Do you need anything? Water, a practice room? No, thank you. I'm fine. The woman nodded and moved on to check in with the other performers. But Dorothy caught her glancing back twice and then saw her lean close to another staff member and whisper something. They both looked in Dorothy's direction. The minutes crawled by. Through the heavy backstage curtain, Dorothy could hear the audience filling the concert hall. Voices rose and fell like waves. Somewhere someone laughed. The sounds were muffled but constant, a reminder that on the other side of that curtain hundreds of people were waiting. Did you see who else is performing tonight? A voice drifted over from a small cluster of conservatory students. They stood near the practice mirror, adjusting their bow ties and smoothing their hair. I heard the janitor signed up. This came from a tall boy holding a flute case. Someone told me she's actually going to play. You're joking. A girl in a burgundy gown turned to stare at him. The cleaning lady? I'm serious. She put her name down for the community recital. She's doing Chopin. Chopin? The girl's voice rose with disbelief. Which piece? The nocturne in E-flat, I think. There was a moment of silence. Then the girl laughed, not cruelly, but with the kind of bewilderment that comes from hearing something that makes no sense. That's not an easy piece. Is this some kind of joke? Like, is she actually going to try to play it? I guess we'll find out. The boy shrugged. She's performing last. Last? Oh no. That's the worst slot to put someone who doesn't know what they're doing. Everyone will be ready to go home and then... They didn't finish the sentence, but Dorothy understood what they meant. She was going to embarrass herself. In front of all these people. In front of the conservatory's most respected teachers and musicians. She would be the disaster that ended the evening. The story these students would tell for years to come. Her hands felt cold. Her stomach twisted into a knot. For a wild moment, she considered leaving. She could slip out the backstage door, walk to the bus stop, and go home. No one would miss her. They might even be relieved. But then she thought about the piano in the empty concert hall. All those nights, all those hours of practice. The way her fingers had learned to dance across the keys. The way the music made her feel like she was more than just a woman who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. She stayed. The recital began at 7 o'clock sharp. Through the curtain, Dorothy heard the evening's host welcome everyone to the annual community recital. There was applause, warm and expectant. Then the first performer's name was called. The young man with the violin walked on stage with his head high. Dorothy couldn't see him anymore, but she could hear everything. The sound of his footsteps across the wooden stage. The rustle of the audience settling into their seats. And then the music. He was good, very good. His playing was technically perfect, every note clean and precise. When he finished, the applause was strong and appreciative. One by one, the performers went on stage. The two teenage girls played a duet that sparkled like crystal. The 12-year-old boy performed a Bach cello suite that was both powerful and tender. A woman in her 50s sang an aria that made Dorothy's eyes sting with tears. They were all so talented, so well-trained, so comfortable in this world of music and performance. Dorothy's nervousness grew with each performance. Her palms were sweating now. She wiped them on her dress, then worried that she was wrinkling the fabric. Her heart beat too fast. She tried the breathing exercises she had read about in a library book once, but they didn't seem to help. Through the curtain, she could hear the audience. They clapped politely after each performance. Sometimes she heard murmurs of appreciation or quiet comments. These were people who understood music, who could tell the difference between good playing and great playing. What would they think when she walked out there? The evening wore on. 8 performers, 9, 10, 11. And then Dorothy heard the host's voice ring out clearly. For our final performance of the evening, we have Dorothy Chen, who will be playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. This was it. Dorothy stood up. Her legs felt shaky, but they carried her toward the curtain. The stage manager held it open for her, and suddenly she could see everything. The vast concert hall with its rows and rows of seats all filled with people, the brilliant lights that made the stage feel like a different world. And in the center of it all, the grand piano waiting for her. She heard the whispers ripple through the audience. People shifting in their seats to get a better look. Someone near the front saying something that made the people around them turn and stare. Dorothy walked across the stage. Each step felt like it took forever. She was intensely aware of everything. Her simple dress. Her plain shoes. The way her hands hung at her sides, rough from years of cleaning work. In the front row, she could see a distinguished-looking older man in an expensive suit. His hair was silver, perfectly styled. His expression was one of refined patience, the kind of look someone wears when they're preparing to sit through something awkward but necessary. This was Maestro Vincent Rousseau, the conservatory's director. Dorothy recognized him from the photographs hanging in the administrative hallway. He was a legend in the classical music world, a conductor who had led orchestras in Vienna and New York and Tokyo. Right now, he looked like he was already composing the kind words he would use when this was over. Dorothy reached the piano and sat down on the bench. She adjusted it slightly, just as she did every night during her secret practice sessions. The keys looked the same as they always did. Cool and white and perfect, she placed her hands in position. Her fingers trembled slightly. The audience went completely quiet. In that silence, Dorothy could hear everything. Someone's watch ticking, the heating system humming, her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She closed her eyes and took one deep breath, and then she began to play. The first notes floated into the air like feathers on a breeze, soft and gentle. They filled the concert hall with a sound so delicate that everyone in the audience seemed to hold their breath without realizing it. Dorothy's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that surprised even her. All the nervousness that had been building inside her chest melted away the moment she touched the piano. This was where she belonged. Not backstage, not in the hallways with her cleaning cart. Here, right here at this instrument. The opening phrase of Chopin's Nocturne unfolded exactly as it should. Each note connected to the next like pearls on a string. Her left hand provided the gentle accompaniment while her right hand sang the melody. She had played this piece 1,000 times in the empty concert hall, but it had never sounded quite like this. In the audience, the whispers stopped completely. The woman who had been checking her watch put her hand down. The teenage boy who had been scrolling on his phone under his seat slipped it back into his pocket. The conservatory students who had been smirking backstage now leaned forward in the wings, trying to see better. Something unexpected was happening. Dorothy wasn't just playing the notes correctly. She was making music. Real music. The kind that reaches inside your chest and touches something you didn't know was there. Her fingers danced through the first section, building the melody with perfect control. When she reached the part where the music needed to grow louder, she let it swell naturally, not forcing it but letting it bloom like a flower opening to the sun. When it needed to become quiet again, she pulled back with such tenderness that several people in the audience felt their eyes begin to sting. Maestro Rousseau sat up straighter in his seat. His arms, which had been crossed in polite skepticism, slowly unfolded. He leaned forward slightly, his trained ear catching something he hadn't expected to hear tonight. This wasn't amateur playing. This was artistry. The technical skills were there, absolutely. Her fingers were hitting all the right notes at the right times. Her tempo was steady but flexible, speeding up and slowing down in all the places where Chopin himself would have wanted it. Her dynamics, the loud and soft parts, were carefully shaped and controlled, but it was more than technique. Much more, there was emotion in every phrase, not the fake overdone emotion of someone trying to impress an audience. This was real feeling, the kind that comes from somewhere deep inside. It was the emotion of someone who had lived with this music, who had poured her heart into it during countless lonely hours when no one was watching. Dorothy played through the middle section, where the melody became more complex and ornamental. Her fingers moved faster now, adding small decorative notes that sparkled like light on water. But even in these quick passages, every note was clear and intentional. Nothing was muddy or rushed. She had spent weeks on this section alone, practicing it slowly at first, then gradually building up speed. On the nights when her fingers got tired, when the notes started to blur together, she would stop and start over. She never let herself get sloppy. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. The tall boy with the flute stood in the backstage wing with his mouth slightly open. Next to him, the girl in the burgundy gown had forgotten all about her earlier laughter. They exchanged a glance that said the same thing. How is this possible? Out in the audience, people were having similar thoughts. The parents who had come to support their children's performances found themselves captivated by this unexpected final act. The conservatory faculty members, who had been ready to offer polite encouragement to a well-meaning amateur, now sat in stunned silence. One woman in the 5th row felt tears running down her cheeks without knowing exactly why. The music was just so beautiful, and there was something about the woman playing it. Something honest and pure and completely without pretense. Dorothy reached the most famous part of the nocturne, the section that everyone recognizes even if they don't know classical music. This was the heart of the piece, the moment where everything comes together. The melody soared up high, then cascaded back down like water flowing over rocks. This was the part she had been most nervous about. It required perfect control, perfect timing. One wrong note here would be obvious to everyone. One slip of the fingers and the magic would break. But her hands knew what to do. They had practiced this moment so many times that they moved almost on their own. The muscle memory was there, built up through 20 years of secret dedication. The notes poured out of the piano, rich and full and absolutely right. Dorothy let herself get lost in the music now. She forgot about the audience. She forgot about being a cleaning woman in a cheap dress. She forgot about all the people who had doubted her and all the reasons she shouldn't be here. There was only the music, and the piano, and the way they connected to each other. Maestro Rousseau closed his eyes and listened with his whole being. In his 35 years as a musician and conductor, he had heard this nocturne performed hundreds of times. By students, by professionals, by world-famous pianists in the greatest concert halls of Europe. But he had rarely heard it played with this much heart. Technical perfection was common at the conservatory. The students here could play difficult pieces with machine-like precision. They had excellent teachers and expensive instruments and all the advantages that money could buy. What they often lacked was this deep, genuine connection to the music, this sense that the performer and the piece were not separate things but two parts of the same whole. Where had this woman learned to play like this? Who had taught her to shape phrases with such natural musicality? How had someone with no formal training developed such refined taste and control? The nocturne moved into its final section. The melody that had soared so high now came back down to earth, settling into a quieter, more reflective mood. This was where Chopin let the listener breathe, where the music became intimate and personal again. Dorothy played these final phrases with infinite gentleness. Each note was like a whispered secret, meant only for the person listening. The sound grew softer and softer, fading away like daylight at dusk. Her fingers touched the final chord. She let it ring out, holding down the sustain pedal so the sound could bloom and expand and fill the whole space. The notes hung in the air, beautiful and complete. And then slowly, gradually, they faded into silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. Dorothy sat at the piano with her hands still on the keys, her eyes still closed. She was breathing carefully, trying to calm her racing heart. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had played the entire piece without any major mistakes, and it had felt right. It had felt like all those hours of practice had been worth it. But she didn't know what the audience had heard. She didn't know if they had felt what she had felt. She was afraid to open her eyes and see their faces. The silence stretched on. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Dorothy finally opened her eyes and lifted her hands from the piano. She started to stand up, preparing to walk off stage quickly before anyone could say anything. That's when she heard it. A single pair of hands clapping. The sound was strong and clear, cutting through the silence like a bell. Dorothy turned her head toward the audience, confused. Who was clapping? The polite thing would have been for everyone to clap together, even if they hadn't enjoyed it. It was Maestro Rousseau. He was standing up in the front row, his hands coming together in steady, deliberate applause. His face wore an expression Dorothy had never seen on anyone looking at her before. It was respect. And then, like a wave rolling to shore, the entire audience rose to their feet. The sound of applause filled the concert hall like thunder. It wasn't the polite clapping that had followed the other performances. This was something else entirely. It was loud and enthusiastic and completely genuine. Dorothy stood frozen at the piano, her hands still trembling slightly from the performance. She didn't understand what was happening. Everyone was standing. All of them. The well-dressed parents in the middle rows. The conservatory students scattered throughout the audience. The faculty members who usually looked so serious and critical. They were all on their feet, clapping for her. The woman in the 5th row who had been crying was clapping so hard her hands were turning red. The teenage boy with his phone was whistling through his fingers. Even the security guard who usually sat by the entrance had come to the doorway of the concert hall and was applauding along with everyone else. Dorothy managed a small, uncertain bow. She didn't know what else to do. In all her imaginings of this moment, she had never pictured this response. She had hoped people would be polite. Maybe they would smile and give her a nice round of applause for trying. But this was beyond anything she had dreamed. She started to walk toward the stage exit, her legs feeling shaky again, but for a different reason now. "Wait. Please wait." The voice cut through the applause. It was strong and carried across the entire hall with the practiced projection of someone who had spent decades commanding attention. Maestro Rousseau was walking toward the stage. Not just standing and clapping, but actually moving toward her. Dorothy stopped in her tracks, unsure of what was happening. Important people like him didn't just approach the cleaning staff. They didn't even notice the cleaning staff. But he was climbing the steps to the stage now, his expensive shoes clicking against the wood. The audience quieted down, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The applause faded to scattered claps and then to complete silence. Dorothy stood near the piano, feeling exposed under the bright stage lights. Maestro Rousseau reached the top of the steps and walked directly to her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes and the gray in his perfectly trimmed beard. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Madam," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. That was extraordinary. Dorothy didn't know what to say. "Thank you" seemed too small for the moment. "Where did you study?" he asked. "Who was your teacher?" The question hung in the air. Everyone in the audience leaned forward slightly, waiting for her answer. This was what they all wanted to know. How had this woman, this cleaning lady in her simple dress, learned to play like that? "I didn't study anywhere," Dorothy said quietly. Her voice sounded too small in the large space, so she cleared her throat and spoke louder. "I don't have a teacher. I work here. I clean this building. And at night, after everyone goes home, I practice on this piano." She could hear the gasps from the audience. Some people started whispering to each other immediately. The conservatory students backstage exchanged shocked looks. Maestro Rousseau stared at her for a long moment. His expression was difficult to read. Then he shook his head slowly, not in disagreement, but in amazement. "You taught yourself to play like that?" His accent became stronger when he was emotional. "All those years by yourself?" 20 years, Dorothy admitted. "I found a beginner's book in the trash. I started with simple songs, and then I just kept going. I'd listen to recordings in the library, try to copy what I heard. I made a lot of mistakes at first, but you kept practicing. Yes, every night. Sometimes for just an hour, sometimes for 3 or 4. It was the part of my day I looked forward to the most." The maestro turned to look at the audience, then back at Dorothy. When he spoke again, his voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, in my 35 years in music, I have taught at conservatories in 3 countries. I have worked with students who began piano lessons at age 3, students whose parents spent fortunes on the finest teachers and the best instruments, students with every advantage you can imagine." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And I have rarely, very rarely heard playing with the depth of feeling and musicality that we just witnessed. What this woman has accomplished on her own, with no teacher and no formal training, is nothing short of remarkable." The applause started again, even louder this time. Dorothy felt her eyes filling with tears. She blinked them back quickly. She had never been comfortable with attention, and this was overwhelming. But Maestro Rousseau wasn't finished. He raised his hand and the audience quieted again. "I would like to extend an invitation," he said, still looking at Dorothy. "The conservatory has a faculty position opening next semester. We need someone to teach the introductory piano course for our community outreach program. Students who are just beginning their musical journey. Students who might not have had access to formal training." He paused, and a small smile appeared on his face. "I cannot think of anyone better qualified to inspire and guide such students than someone who has walked that path herself. Would you consider joining our faculty?" The silence that followed was absolute. Dorothy's mouth opened, but no words came out. "A faculty position? Her? Teaching at the Riverside Conservatory of Music? I don't have any credentials," she finally managed to say. "No degree. No certificate. You are a musician." Maestro Rousseau interrupted gently. "That is the only credential that matters. The rest we can work out. You can audit classes to formalize your knowledge if you wish. But what you demonstrated tonight, cannot be taught in a classroom. You have heart. You have dedication. And you have the ability to transform notes on a page into something that moves people's souls. Dorothy looked out at the audience. They were all watching her, waiting for her answer. The faculty members were nodding. The students looked stunned but curious. The parents were smiling. In the backstage wing, the girl in the burgundy gown had tears streaming down her face. The tall boy with the flute was grinning. Even the woman with the clipboard looked impressed. Dorothy took a shaky breath. I would be honored. The applause that followed was deafening. People were cheering now, not just clapping. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" and others joined in. The sound washed over Dorothy like a warm wave, and this time she let the tears fall. Maestro Rousseau shook her hand firmly, then did something completely unexpected. He bowed to her. A slight bow, but a bow nonetheless, a gesture of respect from one musician to another. As Dorothy finally walked off the stage, her legs barely holding her up, she passed by the backstage area where the other performers waited. They had all come out to watch the end of her performance. Now they moved aside to let her through, and as she passed, they started clapping again. The girl in burgundy reached out and touched Dorothy's arm. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "Really, truly beautiful." The tall boy nodded. "I've been studying piano for 15 years, and I don't play with half that much feeling." "How did you do it?" Dorothy paused. She thought about all those lonely nights in the empty concert hall. All the times her fingers ached from practice. All the moments when she felt like giving up but kept going because the music meant everything to her. "I played because I loved it," she said simply. "Not because anyone was watching. Not because I had to. Just because the music made me feel alive." The boy nodded slowly, like she had just told him something profound. Dorothy made her way to the backstage exit, but before she could leave, the woman with the clipboard hurried over. "I need to apologize," she said, slightly out of breath. "When you signed up, I didn't think. I assumed." She stopped, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I judged you before I even heard you play." "It's okay," Dorothy said. "Most people did. Well, they won't anymore." The woman smiled. "I have a feeling your life is about to change quite a bit." As Dorothy stepped out into the cool November night, those words echoed in her mind. Change. Yes, things would be different now. But in a way, everything important had already changed the moment she decided to sign up for the recital. The moment she decided she was worthy of being heard. Dorothy didn't sleep much that night. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the recital in her mind. The applause, the maestro's words, the job offer. It all felt like a dream that she might wake up from at any moment. When morning came, she got dressed for work as usual. Her cleaning uniform hung in the closet where it always did. She put it on automatically, her hands going through the familiar motions. Maybe yesterday had been a dream after all. Maybe she would go to work and everything would be exactly the same as it had been for 23 years. But when she arrived at the conservatory at 7 o'clock, things were definitely not the same. The security guard at the entrance stood up when he saw her. "Miss Chen, that was something else last night. My wife and we couldn't stop talking about it on the drive home." Dorothy smiled, still not used to being recognized. "Thank you. That's very kind." As she walked down the hallway toward the maintenance office, students she had never spoken to before looked up and waved. A young woman practicing violin in one of the glass-walled rooms actually stopped playing and gave her a thumbs up through the window. The maintenance supervisor was waiting for her in the office. He was a large man with kind eyes who had hired Dorothy more than 2 decades ago. "Dorothy," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit down. We need to talk." Her stomach dropped. Was she in trouble? Had she done something wrong by performing? "I got a call this morning from the administration office," he continued. "Maestro Rousseau wants to meet with you at 10 o'clock to discuss the teaching position." "He's serious about it, Dorothy. This is real." Dorothy sat down heavily. "I thought maybe he was just being nice. Caught up in the moment. The maestro doesn't do things just to be nice. If he offered you a job, he meant it." The supervisor leaned back in his chair. "The question is, do you want it?" "I don't know if I can do it," Dorothy admitted. "Teaching me? These are serious students. What if I mess up? What if they realize I don't really know what I'm doing?" "You played Chopin in front of hundreds of people last night. You can do this," he smiled. "Besides, you've been watching these students for 23 years. You probably know more about how they learn than most of the teachers here." At 10 o'clock, Dorothy found herself sitting in Maestro Rousseau's office. It was a beautiful room with tall windows overlooking the conservatory gardens. The walls were lined with photographs of famous musicians and concert halls from around the world. The maestro sat behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. There were two other people in the room. A woman with short gray hair who turned out to be the dean of faculty, and a younger man who was the head of the community outreach program. "Miss Chen," Maestro Rousseau began, "we've been discussing your situation this morning. We want to make you an official offer." For the next hour, they talked about details. The position would start in January after the winter break. Dorothy would teach 2 introductory piano classes, working with adult students from the community who had always wanted to learn music, but never had the chance. She would also be assigned a faculty mentor to help her develop her teaching methods. "We'll need to audit your own skills formally," the dean explained, "not because we doubt your ability, but because there are certain requirements for faculty members. You'll take some theory classes, maybe some music history. Think of it as filling in the gaps. And your salary," the outreach director added, sliding a paper across the desk, "will reflect your position as a faculty member." Dorothy looked at the number written on the paper. It was almost 3 times what she made as a cleaning woman. Her hands started shaking again. "This is too much," she whispered. "I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do." Maestro Rousseau's voice was firm but gentle. "You've earned this through 20 years of dedication that nobody saw. Now it's time for you to share what you've learned." Dorothy signed the papers with a pen that probably cost more than her monthly grocery bill. When she stood up to leave, the dean shook her hand warmly. "Welcome to the faculty, Dorothy. Something tells me you're going to inspire a lot of people." The story of Dorothy's performance spread quickly. By the end of the week, a local newspaper had written an article about her. They called her the hidden musician of Riverside Conservatory. The article included a photo of her sitting at the grand piano, and it talked about her journey from janitor to faculty member. Other news outlets picked up the story. A television station came to interview her. People started recognizing her on the street. It was overwhelming and strange and wonderful all at once. But the best part came a few weeks later on the first day of her new job. Dorothy arrived early at the classroom where she would be teaching. It was a small room with a piano in the corner and chairs arranged in a semicircle. Her hands were sweating as she arranged her notes and tried to remember everything she wanted to say. The students started arriving at 9 o'clock. There were 12 of them, ranging in age from 25 to 73. A young man in a business suit who had always wanted to learn piano but never had time. A grandmother who had promised herself she would finally take lessons after her husband passed away. A woman who had given up music as a teenager and now wanted to try again. They looked nervous. Some of them kept glancing at the piano like it might bite them. Dorothy recognized that fear because she had felt it herself. "Good morning," she said, standing in front of them. "My name is Dorothy Chen, and I'm going to be your teacher. But before we start, I want to tell you something about myself." She told them her story. Not the version that was in the newspapers, but the real story. The nights when her fingers hurt so much she could barely hold her cleaning supplies the next day. The times she played the same measure 50 times because she couldn't get it right. The moments when she felt like giving up because it seemed impossible that someone like her could ever really play. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said. "Learning piano is hard. There will be days when you want to quit. Days when you feel like you're not making any progress. Days when you wonder why you're even trying." The students nodded. They understood. "But I'm also going to tell you this," Dorothy continued, her voice stronger now. "If you love music, really love it, that love will carry you through. You don't need to be a child prodigy. You don't need expensive teachers or perfect pitch or some special gift that other people don't have. You just need to care enough to keep trying." She walked over to the piano and sat down. "Let me show you something. This is the first song I ever learned to play. It's just 5 notes, nothing fancy. But when I played these 5 notes for the first time by myself, I felt like I had discovered magic." She played the simple melody, 5 notes, slow and clear. When she finished, she looked at her students. "That's where we're going to start, with 5 notes. And we're going to build from there. 1 note at a time, 1 song at a time. We're going to learn together." A woman in the back row raised her hand. She was probably in her 50s, wearing a cardigan and glasses. "Miss Chen, can I ask you something?" "Of course. And please call me Dorothy. Do you ever still get nervous? Even now after everything?" Dorothy thought about the question. "Yes," she said honestly. Every time I sit down at a piano, there's still a little voice in my head that says I'm not good enough, that I don't belong here, that someone is going to figure out I'm just making this up as I go along. So how do you deal with that voice? I play anyway, because the music is bigger than the fear, and every time I finish a piece, that voice gets a little quieter. The students smiled. They understood that too. Over the next few months, Dorothy taught her classes and took her own classes to formalize her knowledge. She learned music theory and history, filling in all the gaps from her self-taught education. It was hard work, but it felt different from the hard work of cleaning. This work fed something inside her that had been hungry for a very long time. Her students progressed slowly but steadily. Some of them struggled more than others. Some picked it up quickly and surprised themselves. But all of them kept coming back, week after week, because Dorothy understood something that many teachers forget. She understood what it felt like to be invisible, to have a dream that seemed impossible, to love something so much that you would practice in secret for 20 years just to be close to it. One evening, Dorothy stayed late at the conservatory to practice. It was different now. She didn't have to hide anymore. She had permission to be here, an actual key to the building, but she still liked the quiet hours after everyone left, when it was just her and the music. She was playing the Chopin Nocturne again when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see the girl in the burgundy gown, the one who had been crying backstage the night of the recital. "I'm sorry," the girl said. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I was practicing in the other room and heard you playing. I just wanted to listen." "It's okay," Dorothy said. "Would you like to sit?" The girl sat in one of the audience seats. Dorothy continued playing, finishing the piece. When she was done, they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" the girl finally said. "Sure. How do you make it sound so real? So honest. We learn all the techniques, all the proper ways to play. But somehow it doesn't sound like that when we do it." Dorothy thought carefully before answering. "I think maybe it's because I never played for anyone but myself for so long. I didn't know the rules about how it was supposed to sound. I just played what I felt. Maybe that's the difference." The girl nodded slowly. "I've been so worried about playing everything perfectly that I forgot to feel it." "Perfect is overrated," Dorothy said with a smile. "Music is supposed to be alive, and alive things are never perfect. They're messy and surprising and real." The girl left a few minutes later, but Dorothy stayed at the piano. She thought about how strange life was, how you could spend years being invisible and then suddenly everything could change, how you could go from cleaning a building to teaching in it, how you could discover that the thing you loved in secret was the thing that would change your life. She played a few more notes, then stopped and looked around the empty concert hall. This was still her favorite time, just her and the piano and the quiet, but now, instead of hiding her music, she was sharing it, teaching it, passing it on to people who felt the same hunger she had felt, and that, Dorothy thought, was the real magic. Not just learning to play, but learning that you were worthy of being heard.